Like most people, my 20s so far has been a series of highs, some very, very high, and then lows. Like points where we're like, is this supposed to be this hard? Is this supposed to be so painful? And I feel like the long and short answer is yes. But what I wanted to share is things that I wish I knew earlier in my 20s. Now sitting in my late 20s and having been quite proud of a lot of the things that I've achieved, but recognizing that I could have done a lot of things better or just like known about these things and been able to take action and progress towards my goals quicker, but also enjoy the whole being 20 a lot more as well. The first thing I wish I knew is that you can use jobs to generate high value skills and income without them being your perfect magical dream job. So I think when we're younger, we think as soon as we get into our 20s or leave uni, we'll have the perfect job. And a lot of us strive for that. And some people do start their career paths really early in a sense that, it's everything they expected it to be. But most of us have a lot of winding to do. And that's okay and it's normal. The key thing though is being in jobs that allow you to develop high value skills. And it's not always as obvious as it seems. I've spoken before about being a receptionist. And this allows me to develop my communication skills at a time when I really, really needed it, right? And I might not have understood all the value of it at the time. I don't actually think I did. But from being like this really almost kind of awkward and shy person towards the end of high school and sixth form, which like I've said before, I'm not sure how it happened. I think it's puberty because before I was very outgoing. Then I kind of went into myself a little bit. But like that job there allowed me to develop such a fundamental skill, a very, very high value skill in the sense of allowing me to move through this world in the way that I wanted to, move through my 20s with the poise, but also with the ability to convey what it is that I want, desire, and what I can bring. So that was key. But then there's also more obvious things like being an engineer and working in tech and developing high value skills in that sense. Because the thing about a job is you are effectively being paid not only to bring your skills, but during that time, ideally you should be generating new ones or improving them. And so if you see it like that in your early 20s and not always like I'm not doing everything I want to do all the time in these 8 hours, that can be beneficial. That's not to say that you don't work towards things that are definitely more aligned with you. But I think if I had framed a lot of my jobs or the way I thought about things in that way, I think it would have been more enjoyable in the moment. And I may even have drawn more out of it. And the second half of this was like, sometimes you need to pick career paths that also are going to allow you to make some money up front, right? Because the money that I have been able to make from some of the jobs that I've had have opened up so many doors, right? And that's not to say that I don't like my job, not at all, to be honest. But it's also allowed me to use that money from a, relatively high income position in tech to do other things as well, develop other skills, buy the kit and the gear for my YouTube channel or travel the world. And so use jobs for everything that you can, as opposed to always seeing them as the centerpiece of your life in your 20s and in your early 20s especially. The second thing I wish I knew in my early 20s is you need to get comfortable with learning and sharing in public, even if it sometimes means failing in front of everyone. Now, this is psychologically really hard to get over because it's like, I don't really want to fail in front of other people. Like, this is embarrassing. But the amount of opportunities that have come from me sharing in public is ridiculous at this point, right? So it's everything from being on YouTube and sharing my journey, my path, the things that I've learned from books, but also from my tech and my career, but also on things like LinkedIn. I've had so many jobs come to me via LinkedIn, especially as I was more active on there, sharing what I knew, sharing what I was learning, sharing what I was up to. Like, I just hosted this webinar and so forth. Like, people start to gravitate towards you and opportunities start to kind of just almost come out of nowhere. But this is the idea of generating your own luck, right? The more that you do, the more that you put yourself out there, the more opportunities come to you. Like this YouTube channel alone, I've been able to network with so many other creators, especially with this and TikTok, those of us who are in London and also in this particular space, and learn and, just share ideas and information in that sense. Like there's so many things that can come with learning in public, especially if you are learning with the idea of bringing value to those around you. I think that is also, and probably leads on from this, but value creation is so important, right? And it's not about just consuming consistently, although that is part of the process because you kind of consume, you synthesize and you build, rebuild things, take them apart and put them together in new exciting ways. But value is really all that our market is, an exchange of value. And so the more that you can build this in your 20s and then share it, so those first two kind of points, the better you'll do, just like the better you'll do universally. The next one, and it's probably a little bit emotional, but it's I wish I had believed in myself more in my early 20s. Like, despite the fact that I had done quite well in school and even career wise, I don't really think I ever gave myself the credit that I deserved, right? And the belief that I deserved. And the reason why this is so important, because as much as you are your greatest asset, you are also your potential greatest liability, because it is you who will stop you from doing new things if you don't have that belief in yourself, right? So you will put the blocker in the way of you trying out that new thing, trying out that new skill, putting yourself out there in terms of love, right? Or in terms of friendship, or putting yourself out there in terms of economic opportunities. All of these things, sorry, you will stop yourself from doing those. The next one is about putting yourself in the right rooms, even if it means spending some money. This is something I'm definitely learning as I get older and have more access to resources, is that it is often worth paying for the more expensive version of a thing, or even just paying full stop to be in a room with people who have the knowledge, the resources, the network that you want access to. Sometimes that means paying for a conference or even paying for like the executive ticket, right? Or flying in a different class. But that one's like, I think you do stuff to start making significant money, because I'm not suggesting that you just blow like all your savings on like a first class ticket that costs 10 grand. But being in certain spaces, I have noticed that just by virtue of proximity, you now have access to people who typically have more. And it's not just about the material thing they have, but it's how they got it. Because the likelihood is they had to acquire skills, knowledge, and like I said, that network to get there. Right. And sometimes they're just genuinely interesting people to speak to. I'm not saying that all of these things have to be like will you invest in my business? Although sometimes those opportunities do exist. And I've heard a number of stories where like, yeah, I went to this thing and I raised my hand in the networking thing that I paid for, and I was sitting on the front seat because I paid for those seats, the front row, sorry. And I was able to talk to somebody afterwards, and they invested in my company. Or like we went back and forth afterwards and they gave me advice on how to build a portfolio. Like, so many things are possible when you put yourself in these spaces, but you have to put yourself in these spaces, in these physical spaces as well. Like, it's one thing to be digitally out there and, learning and sharing in public, but we can't forget the importance of being there in person and meeting people in person, and how those connections, if you form them right initially, can be stronger sometimes than those ones that only exist digitally. The next thing I definitely wish I knew is just because you're good at the sciences doesn't mean you can't also be good and pursue creative work and, the arts and so forth. And like, I think this is something that I spoke about before, but it's plagued me. Like, I'm just not good at art, right? So I'm just not going to pursue that. I'm not going to look into those sorts of things because I'm the science, the engineering, the tech girl, right? Like the natural sciences. I'm not that side. And that self-imposed limiting belief, that obstacle, effectively, you becoming a liability and a whole path in life that could lead you to such interesting things, such interesting journeys, experiences, and potentially more new work, right? Like, and I'm not saying necessarily work in the sense that you have to sell these things, but like producing really interesting pieces of art, or in terms of music, whatever it is. I'm saying art, but it's not just about painting. It's whatever creative endeavor that you decide to pursue. But just because you are one thing does not mean you cannot be other, because it also goes the other way around. I've heard people who are more artistic say that, well, I'm just not a maths person, or I'm just not a science person and so forth. But who's making these rules? Like, we be making these rules and then like applying them to ourselves and then just being sad because of the rules that we apply to ourselves, which is like, that doesn't make a lot of sense. Moving on, and I think like this is only something I really developed in like the last 2 years, if that. But this is the idea of seeking out mentors, seeking out people who have, gone down the path that you are looking to go down, or an adjacent path, because the amount of value that you can get if you can build these sorts of connections with a mentor, it can set you like so much further ahead of where you would have been if you were just sitting trying to work this out on your own and you didn't have a mentor who could be providing guidance, or be providing value or knowledge, or again, connections, or just also somebody to just like, kind of go back and forth with, somebody who's been there and understands when you say, I'm struggling with this, or like mindset wise, I'm struggling with this. And they're like, yeah, I've been there before, right? Like I've been through this. I know what this is like. I know why you're going through that. Because even that exchange alone can be something that allows you to be like, you know what? This isn't just a me thing. This is like a natural part of the process. I'm going to keep going. The next thing is to invest in your education outside of formal structure, or the formal infrastructure of education. Now, I went to uni. I have my undergraduate degree. I don't regret it. I do not regret having my geography degree. That being said, I do think it's important from as early as possible to take your education and your learning into your own hands, right? It's one thing to be taught this stuff and a syllabus be built out for you, cool. But it is down to you, because learning is a lifelong process, right? You don't just stop learning. And if you do, something's probably going wrong. But when you get to like post-uni, like I'm done now, cool. And so it's up to you to take control of that in your early 20s and beyond. Like, don't be afraid to try out different forms of learning, and whether they're free versions and things online, but also things that may be paid or a fraction of the price of formal education. But the point being is, it's down to us in our early 20s and beyond to take that into our own hands, make the most of it. Because the more that you do that, the more that you realize there are so many things that you have the capacity to learn once you know how. Once you know how your brain works, once you know the best way of you consuming and breaking down information, and then being able to reapply that, gold. Anything's possible after that point. And speaking of the whole like applying the knowledge, this is the next thing I wish that I kind of knew early, which is continue to read extensively. The reading habit that you have curated since a child, fantastic. But don't forget to apply the knowledge, right? Because I think in my early 20s, when I started diving deeper into self-help books, I was consuming, love them. Go to the bookshop, buy another one. Go to the bookshop, buy another one. Until you realize that like, that's cute and everything, but you haven't applied anything. And you're living off the dopamine that is associated with finishing this book, instead of doing the work described in the book or applying the frameworks described in the book. So I would definitely say reading and consuming information is fabulous, but don't forget to apply and put into practice and take those lessons that you're learning into the real world to impact your actual life. I say the next one is kind of linked to the creative side, but it's about developing hobbies. Because in the beginning, I think everything was like, oh, got to do this thing for income, got to do this thing to make it and grind and whatever. But like developing hobbies was something that I didn't really think about too hard, I think, in my early 20s. It was just like, cool, doing this thing. But as I got older, I realized the power of having things that you do for joy or fulfillment that don't necessarily require being tied to a paycheck or being tied to an income, and the value and, like I said, the enjoyment that you get out of that thing and how it can impact so many other parts of your life, right? Like you having hobbies alone is like, I don't want to say it's something to speak about, but it does add layers to you, right? Like if all you do is go home and go to work, which I'm not necessarily bashing you, because I know between going home and work and trying to live right now in this economy is a lot. But what else are you doing to feed and nourish your soul? Like what else are you doing to kind of grow intellectually, creatively, spiritually? What are you doing outside of the things that are for money? And developing hobbies is something that I've definitely seen impact so many parts of my life, like whether it be the painting, whether it now be content creation, which I started in my earlier 20s, but it has impacted so many things. And so I'd say in your early 20s, definitely develop hobbies. Like I think, and to be honest, everything I'm saying goes throughout life, right? Like all of these things could apply to any point in your life, but especially if I'm talking to my younger self, which I can really only talk to. I don't know what older me is going to be doing. I haven't, but yeah. Now this is one that I can quite comfortably say that I'm proud that I did do. But I just want to encourage my younger self and anyone else who's listening to this is really, really develop an exercise routine and a way of thinking about exercise that makes it a lifestyle. Not a, I'm doing this to get skinny for, this event or, nope. You have to see exercise and movement as a way of life, because it impacts so many things. Fundamentally health, but also your aesthetics, the way that you look. And the reality is, the world that we live in, the first thing that people kind of have to make a judgment on you is your appearance. You haven't said anything yet, right? And I'm not saying that you have to live your life solely based on that, but I'm saying you can, if you choose to, leverage that. And I'm not even necessarily saying you have to look, I'm saying you have to look a certain way in terms of weight or, waist to hip ratio. That's not actually what I'm going into, but do you look and do you indicate signs of health? Because that goes for things like skin and hair and all of these sorts of things. But the reason that the exercise is so important is because I've realized as I'm in my later 20s, it's easier to maintain. And I feel like even sometimes if I veer off for a bit, my body can come back into where I want it to really quickly, right? Like there's almost like a window, like of not too far this way, not too far that way. And my body kind of sits within it. And I genuinely think it's because I've been exercising for like over a decade. Granted, I did dance when I was younger, so that probably impacted it too, but I've probably been active my whole life. But in my 20s, that's when I went into lifting and got really into that. And definitely one of the most important things I ever did. Definitely one of the most important things I ever did. Now, one of the last ones is actually more of a word of encouragement to my younger self, because I think I did this, again, quite well, but it wasn't always easy. And this is more about prioritizing experiences and high investment kind of objects instead of flashy things or status symbols. For example, I've had my driving license for quite a while, but I seem to always have fought the urge to like buy a nice fancy car. Now, do I see the Mercedes and think, oh, that's nice. That's a nice one. That SUV could be a bit of me. But I've chosen to spend that kind of money in other ways throughout my life, in going to different places, in going to different countries, but also in buying tech that I know will help me, build more content and create more content or work faster in terms of what I do in my engineering job. Like, I bought the Apple display. It was an expensive piece of tech. I use it every single day. Like, the return on interest for this Apple display, and people could have said, we could have got a cheaper monitor. I could have. And you could have, instead of buying a Mercedes, bought a Golf. But we all prioritize what's important to us and what we think is going to help us overall. But without this becoming a studio display advert, the point that I'm making is saying no sometimes to those things, even in terms of like designer bags, which is something that I'm, now that I'm a little bit older, buying the odd thing there, here and there, but like it wasn't something that I was in my being 23 and thinking that I needed a Louis Vuitton bag. What do I need a Louis Vuitton bag for at 23? And there's no savings in your account. You've not invested in anything. You haven't even, acquired a high income skill. What are you doing with a Louis Vuitton bag? Taking all of your money from your part-time job or from this place to buy things that you can't afford, you can't sustain. Like, if that bag goes missing, you're not one of those people who can buy it again tomorrow and feel no way about it. So I think that kind of a mindset shift is really important in your early 20s. Just, don't fall victim to it. Stay on track is what I'm telling my younger self. Anyway, that's it. This was a definitely more chilled vibe video. And it was just some things that I wanted to share. Like a little letter, an open letter to my younger self, and really anybody who's thinking about ways that they can kind of improve their life and get themselves back on track if you feel like you've fallen off. I'll see you in the next video.